We're going to get into cutting boards a little bit. Got a cutting board right here. Is it big enough? We're going to get into this too. Is there bacteria on your cutting board? Is there mold on your cutting board? How do you take care of your cutting board? What do you do? What's the secret? Everybody's slathering oil on their cutting board. Some people slather Crisco on their cutting board. Some people slather pork fat on their cutting board. Some people put olive oil on their cutting board. Some people are pretty smart. They think, and they're putting avocado oil on their cutting board. And some people even go a little bit further and they're like, over here at our household, we put hemp seed oil on our cutting board here because we really got our stuff together because we know so much. We're going to talk about all that. Is it right? Is it wrong? What's the best options? Do you even have a cutting board? If you don't and you decide to get one someday, you might want these tips and this information because I can promise you this, it's going to be really interesting. You guys, what do you do with your cutting board? How does it work for you? What have you been taught about your cutting boards? What's happening there? And what do you actually put on your cutting boards? Are you a vegetarian? Are you plant-based? Are you somebody that you're plant-based, but somebody else in your family is not plant-based? They're eating animal products and their animal products are going on the cutting board? And you're just like, oh my God, there's chicken on my cutting board. There's chicken on my cutting board. And you're freaking out. Is that happening? Then you should have a separate cutting board. So I will say this to anybody who's living in a house. This is my first tip. Is if you're living in a house with somebody else that's actually cooking chicken and they're cutting chicken up and it's on the cutting board and all that, and they take a sponge and they clean it all up and everything, and you come along and you now actually do stuff on the cutting board. You got some lettuce on here or whatever. It's like Russian roulette in the worst way. So one of the tips I have to offer, which is definitely have a separate cutting board if it's at all possible, or flip the board and mark the board. So board flipping is my first tip of the day, but we're going to go into mold and bacteria. We're going to go into some other stuff too. We ain't done with just flipping the board. That's not the only thing we're going to talk about. All right. So say I'm cooking a chicken here on this board, and I'm actually cooking a chicken, preparing a chicken, and I'm cutting it up, and it's raw, and it's all raw chicken on here. And you don't have another cutting board in the house, but somebody does that, and you don't want to actually, use that board. You want to learn how to flip the board, but you want to mark the board. So you want to make sure you put a permanent marker somewhere on the edge that points an arrow down, or points an arrow in a certain direction. That arrow pointing in a certain direction will be your side of the board. That's a really helpful thing to do. So when someone's done and you want to make your food and someone actually had raw meat on the board, some type of animal product or chicken on the board, you can flip it after they did it, and you got it. I see someone talking about peroxide, and we're going to talk about peroxide on the board. But peroxide ain't the only answer. So that's one tip all on its own. If you have somebody in the family that's actually using something deadly like raw chicken, because raw chicken obviously can kill a lot of people. It has in the past. It just does. It's not an anti-chicken talk. It's just a fact. Anybody who loves chicken and eats chicken, they have to be careful, or they can get in trouble and they can get really sick. So when it comes down to cutting boards, here's one tip that's very important. You don't want to get wetness under your cutting board. If your cutting board's sitting there on the counter and it's a wood cutting board or any kind, especially wood because that's what we're talking about today, you don't want it moist or damp underneath the cutting board. So what you want to do on the counter with your cutting board is you want to take a dry towel and you want to get the board off the counter a little bit with the dry towel. So you got your board on a towel. What this does is if you have drippage, so you cut up tomatoes, you cut up something wet, something juicy, you cut up fruit, apples, you're cutting lemons, and then dripping, or you're using water on your board for some reason, you're cleaning it and it drips, then roll down, go down, and they end up going under the board. They travel under the board, and mold starts to happen very quickly, like instantaneously. Mold will start to grow underneath your cutting board. Now, mold does some weird stuff. Mold can travel through wood without it even looking like it can. Mold doesn't just get down to, say, a millimeter layer inside your cutting board. Mold can travel through the board. How does it travel through the board? Most everybody's cutting boards are not one piece. They're glued together. Cutting boards are multiple pieces glued together. That's what cutting boards are now. Long gone are the days where there was old oaks and old wood, old growth wood, where you cut this one piece, and that's your cutting board, this one piece of wood. Cutting boards are pieces put together. Mold will travel without it being seen through each slab, right through the glue. Mold loves glue, the glue used for cutting boards. It actually can use glue to travel. And so even though that glue is hard and that board is pressed together, mold can still grow through the glue and get deep into your board. You might be somebody that's like, well, only one side of my board has mold. I'm going to flip the board over. And a lot of people do that. I can't afford to get another board right now, so I'm going to flip the board over, and the moldy side of the board is there. I like that. I like when people do that. That's a good thing you can do. You can flip your board and have the mold on the other side. Eventually, though, the mold will grow through the glue, and you won't see the mold on your other side, your clean side, but it will be there. It'll be within the glue itself through each section of the board. Another thing about mold in cutting boards is there's people out there that are mold freaks. They're making sure there's no mold in their house. There's no mold under their kitchen counter sinks. There's no mold in their bathrooms. There's no mold in their showers. They got mold meters, and the mold meters are actually saying there's no mold in their house, but their board is moldy, and they don't even know it. They have a moldy board. Now, let's go into what we can lay on a board, what we can put on a board. You're thinking, you got to oil up your board. First thing that happens when you get a brand new cutting board is you're probably told, or you're probably thinking, that you got to oil up the board. So you got to drop a little bit on there. So let's put a little on here, right here. I'll show you too with a little close-up maybe we could get. But I'll put a little bit on. Put a lot more on there because people put olive oil on their boards. But I'm not telling you to put olive oil on your boards. My boards stay dry and oil-free. Not because I'm afraid of olive oil. I'm not afraid of olive oil. Not because I'm afraid of hemp oil. Not because I'm afraid of walnut oil. Not because I'm afraid of avocado oil. Not because I'm afraid of coconut oil. When you put oil on your cutting boards, you're proliferating the bacteria levels and you're proliferating the mold levels. So when you lay oil on your boards, you're encapsulating mold and bacteria in between the oil and the wood. And then the bacteria stays alive and preserved within the oil and then grows. It grows. It spawns. A couple of things go on. That bacteria has oxygen that's on the surface of the air and mixed in the oil when you rub it in. So you're rubbing oxygen into the board. Oxygen doesn't necessarily stop bacteria from growing. That's how it works at all. In this situation, you're rubbing the oil base with the oxygen and you're mixing it all up with the bacteria. You're shoving it down into the wood fibers, and bacteria is really small. and you think you got a nice, clean, oily surface now, and instead you got bacteria growing inside your board, underneath the oil, in the oil, inside the wood fibers, in the wood pulp, you have bacteria growing. I don't recommend oiling or fattening up your boards. It's not a good idea. You can't kill bacteria well. The oil will also go deep down into the first or second layer, a good millimeter, maybe even 2 millimeters of your board, maybe even 3 millimeters of your board, and harbor and safe hold lots of bacteria and mold. So you think you got a clean board. I'm going to rub the oil on here right here. You think you got a clean board. You think you oiled it up nice. You protected it. You oiled up your board. And all you did was create a playground and a petri dish. Your board becomes a petri dish for bacteria, viruses if they're there. If somebody cut their finger while cooking and they got an Epstein-Barr, somebody cut their finger while they're cooking and they got HSV1, 2, someone cut their finger and they got HHV7, whatever it is, it's in the board. Cytomegalovirus, HPV, it's in the board, because it's not going to die. It's going to sit in the board, on the board, and the oil is going to preserve it and keep it there for quite a long time. And it might even procreate while it's actually there. Bacteria will for sure. So I'm giving you this little tidbit right here, which is very important and valuable, which is don't oil up your boards. Don't grease them up, oil them up. Don't avocado oil them up. Don't walnut oil them up. Don't coconut oil them up. Don't sesame seed oil them up. Don't oil them up. And don't pork fat them. Don't Crisco them. Don't stick some other kind of oil. Don't vegetable oil them either. Elaine says, wow. Now I realize I didn't have problems with mold until properly oiled the board. Oiling your board will create a mold fest and a bacteria fest in and on your board, eventually also possibly getting through your home. Okay. Are you guys liking the tips so far or no? Should I keep going? Should I keep going? All right. Cleaning board. Let's hit it. You want your board dry. You want your board clean. That's what you want. Always have a sponge designated for the board. The sponge was in the toilet and in the bathroom. I accidentally designated this one for the bathroom and for the toilet. And, but that's okay. I'll squeeze it out. That's all right. We'll clean this board. The sponge was in the toilet. Cleaning the toilet and the sink. There are boogers in the sink that people have and everything else. It's just all in there. And make sure you want to designate a sponge specifically for your cutting boards. That's your sponge. That sponge isn't for your counters. That sponge is not for your counters. Really important tip, you guys. You don't want that sponge for this, right? You don't want this. I'm going to just do this here. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. All right. Oh, yeah, I got to get this clean. I don't want anybody seeing this dirty here. Give it a good wipe. Oh, I got to get this cutting board done now, too. Let's do this right here. Let's get the cutting board. Yeah. You see it everywhere. You see everybody doing it. It's like, yeah, I'll get the counters. Get this done. This. Let me do the sink over here. Never do that. Never do that. Reminds me of people that are like, they're so anal and OCD about something, a certain something. I mean, something else. It's just like, what? Do you ever run into that out there? There's people out there that are so anal about something, like off the charts, right? But then all of a sudden they got this going on and they're doing this. It's like, what? I've seen people like, don't dirty up my car. Don't put a single thing on the floor. Don't get sand in my car floor. Don't get dust on my car. What is that? Is that a bag of chips? Don't get the grease from the bag of chips on the thing. But I'm going to go pick up a piece of gum off a sidewalk and they'll just throw it in their mouth and chew it up. You don't think people do that? No, they don't. But they go and do other things. They go into a kissing fest. Maybe they go into a kissing fest where they're kissing people. They got their mouth inside somebody else's mouth. They're exchanging every single microbe and bacteria and virus. And meanwhile, you get in their car, they're screaming at you because you actually touched your feet to the floor of the car. You want a designated sponge for your cutting board. You just do. All right, let's go into some cleaning of the cutting board. Woo! Woo! Cleaning. Dry and clean. You want the wood dry. Now, what you'll see out there at mainstream is, no, the wood will be ruined. Your cutting board will be ruined. You just bought a brand new wooden cutting board, and you're going to keep it all dry like that, where it's dry? How are you going to do that? You got to oil that board, man. You're destroying your cutting board. You'll hear that out there. That's the mainstream view. Mainstream isn't always right. You want your board dry to the bone. Of course, it's going to be wet when it's wet because you're using your designated sponge and you're cleaning it and everything. And we're going to go into that. Like, what do you use to clean your board? So let's head there too. But first of all, you want your board dry, no oil. And you want it where the board looks like it's starting to bleach. But you're not bleaching your board with bleach. Which takes me to another level there. What are you cleaning your board with? You want something that's going to clean your board, but you want something that's not toxic. You want something that can help clean it, but not toxic. And the lemon juice theory, it's a cute one, where you put lemon juice on the board. I've seen people do raw meat on the board, and then they squeeze lemon afterwards, and they wash it down with lemon juice, and they're like, done. That's clean. That's not enough. I just saw Lemon on IG with a question. Lemon question? It's not enough. You want nothing on here. No food, no fruit, no vegetable juice, no oils, nothing but water, but you still need to clean the board. So here's one of the tricks. Your board will end up collecting things, lots of different things on top of there, hardened food, different stuff. And after you've taken off the stuff that's loose, you take off all the stuff that's loose, okay? After you do that, you want to get water on your board. You want water. Water becomes a killer for microbes, not a thriver. Check this out. Nobody knows this stuff. It's all MM info. MM info. What is it? MM info. Okay. Water is an inhibitor. Why? Water swells the wood. It swells the wood. It swells it. That swelling of the wood brings out bug killers naturally in the tree. So you want water on your board, but you don't want oil. What happens is the water on the board is going to loosen up hardened food, harden this, juices from things that are in there. It's going to harden, what it's going to do is it's going to soften up the wood, and it's going to loosen up the hardened things that are on your board. And then you take off the hard stuff. You do your sponge, right? You can get some more water on here and get it on here. But what happens is the wood swells and the antimicrobials come out of the wood. Antimicrobials are naturally inside this wood forever. You can have a cutting board that's 30 years old, 40 years old in your family line, and that wood will still have antimicrobials in here forever, sitting in here, but you can't access them because you ain't got the key. If you're putting oil all over your board, you'll never access them. It's never going to happen. You keep your boards wet with oil, you're never going to access the antimicrobials. They're not going to come out and play. When you keep that board dry and clean, and you put water in that board to clean it, what happens is, and you leave it even if it's for a couple of minutes, when you're cleaning a few minutes, your wood starts to swell. When your wood starts to swell, the antimicrobials are now leaching out. They're leaching out and they're killing stuff, naturally killing stuff, so nothing can live deep within the wood of the board and harbor itself there. You get your board clean. Take a hand towel and dry it up now. Now say you're somebody, you had raw chicken on your board, you had beef on your board, you had raw fish on your board. You want to clean it like this, but then you want to do something else. You want to bring in the hydrogen peroxide. This one hasn't been opened yet. I'm going to open it. I'm going to give you a play-by-play as I try to open this. Okay, now we got peroxide. Peroxide won't destroy the wood's ability to release antimicrobials. Keep that in mind. Bleach will. You don't want to use bleach or toxic cleaners, especially bleach, on top of your boards. Bleach will destroy your natural antimicrobials that lie within the wood surface and deep within the wood of the tree. A tree will have a lifetime of antimicrobials built into it that will seep out, right? Peroxide won't destroy that. So you put your peroxide on the board. You can take your sponge that's designated for your board, and you can move that peroxide around your board just like this. And you can start making sure you kill that chicken salmonella, that E. coli from the beef, and whatever. You want to get that peroxide on here, just like I just did right there. Okay? Give it some time. Yvonne says unbelievable information. Unbelievable comment. Thank you. Over here. Boom, boom, boom. I like that. Boom. Boom, boom. I like it. All right. That's peroxide on the board. Ready? Take a towel. You should watch this live a bunch of times because it might go in one ear, right? And might go out the other ear by accident. Some of this stuff, there's a lot of info. I just cleaned off the peroxide, but that's not all. Now, get some water on it. Rinse out your sponge, your designated sponge. Rinse out your designated sponge. Now take off the residue of the peroxide with water. Like that. Done. Done. That's it. Your wood will swell. The antimicrobials will come out strong. Used a little bit of peroxide on there. Amazing. Natasha says, thank you so much for this information. Wow, 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 wow. All right. So I want to go into a little bit more of some other things. Say you can't afford another cutting board. You don't have the money. You don't have the budget. But your cutting board has mold on it. You can see the mold on it. What happens is that with a lot of people, the mold usually starts on the other side of the board, like this, the back of the board. You have to have that towel underneath your board because the juices of whatever you're doing are going to most likely end up falling down here and soaking underneath the board and the counter, and it's going to sit there and fester, and it's going to soak itself back into the board, right? And you don't want to do that. You want to have that towel, and then you want to change that towel every week or 4 days or 5 days. You want to change the towel, flip it out, get a new towel down, put your board down. When you oil your boards, you end up splintering your wood. Last thing you need is splinters you can't really see going in a family member's throat and getting stuck in there. Does it happen? Yeah, it does. Ever hear of somebody having something going on with their throat? Right? It can happen. Little splinters can get in places. We can swallow the wood splinters. They can get hung up and jammed into the intestinal tract lining for a year and just sit there in the lining. And then the intestinal tract just calluses over it eventually, and it becomes a polyp in the intestinal tract. The point is, the oil-based surfaces eventually weaken the wood to such a point where it splinters so much easier when you're cutting and chopping. So keep that in mind. You'll end up splintering without even seeing it. Let's see, here's a question over on IG. Can you run it under the water in the sink? 2, if the board is smaller or it's better to just wait. No, you can run it under the sink. You can run it under the sink if you can or want to. Just make sure the other side of the board is dry before you place the board down on your counter, on that towel on your counter. Here's something very important about the cutting boards. Another tip I think I should say is the reason why you want a towel underneath your board too is you don't want your board sliding. So when you're cutting fruits and vegetables and meat and poultry or whatever you're cutting and chopping up, you don't want the board accidentally moving on you and you cut your wrist, cut your hand, cut your finger. That's why I like the towel, a nice towel underneath the board. That's one thing that's really important too. People don't know that. Your board's going to get less damage, by the way, and last longer if you don't oil it. It's the opposite to what they say. So they say your board will last forever if you oil it, but your board will actually weaken, go moldy, become problematic, become a bacterial-ridden board, and it'll start to wear out too faster than it should. Did you ever hear of a tree that's in a river underwater and it's petrified? Did you ever hear about a tree that, and I wasn't even thinking of this, like SOC's giving me this right now. You ever hear about a tree that falls into a lake and it's underwater? It's in the mud and the water, and it comes out of that lake. It's petrified, or it can be used all the same as if it was cut down. Literally, the 1865, they cut it down. It was logged, it got away, it went down under the water. It lost track with all the other logs, right? And you pull that out. Do you guys know how this stuff works with wood? And you can pull that oak tree out of the freaking river and plane it and cut it. Yeah. It was water. It was in the water, not in the oil. It wasn't in the oil. So why do I prefer wood over plastic? Well, plastic, I don't like all the little plastic fibers. They peel off the board, you chop it up, you got plastic. Little pieces you can't see are everywhere, and you know the whole plastic thing. I won't give you guys a lecture on plastic. You can read the Medical Me books. I have lots of information about plastics in Medical Me books. All right. And when it comes down to the plastic boards, you'll have a higher bacteria range procreating on your boards. It's something you don't want. I prefer wood over plastic and even glass. Now, glass I don't like because you don't know it, but the glass shards are flaking. They're flaking. So here's what they do with glass. So the glass cutting boards is they put a layer of plastic on your glass cutting boards. You guys know that? There's a layer of plastic you can never see, like plexiglass over your glass cutting board, over the glass. You can't see it. That's supposed to give that coating for you, that chemical-based coating, while you're cooking and chopping and you're on your glass and all that. Eventually, you'll be eating all that plexiglass, plastic crap, petroleum-based product that they laced on your glass cutting board. You'll be eating that with your sandwiches. You'll be eating that with your food. And then when that wears off, guess what, you guys? You'll be eating glass chips. Not chips like the kind of chip where you chip a glass and it's a big chip and you see the chip fly, or you get cut on a little sharp chip. No. When you use glass cutting boards, you won't see it, but they actually temper the glass so it doesn't shatter the same. So what happens is little micro flakes of glass come off the glass cutting board that you can't see. It's wear and tear that you can't see. Little tiny bits. And you eat it, and you long before you won't even know it. 10 years later, you might start seeing something weird with your glass cutting board, and you're like, shit, I just ate all that stuff for years.